Since the announcement of Fortune's Weave last year, I have been thinking about both it and its predecessor, Fire Emblem Three Houses, a lot. To be specific, my first reaction after seeing Fortune's Weave's first trailer was to pray desperately that it wasn't going to have 4 roots like some people were theorizing. Now, this isn't because I think the Intelligent Systems and Koei Tecmo team are incapable of writing a good story with branching paths. In fact, I generally really trust the Three Houses writing team, and I do not think they are wholly or even necessarily partially responsible for any of my problems with Three Houses proper. What I don't trust is that the executives will give the Fortune's Weave's developers enough time for them to make a game with 4 unique, fleshed out roots, because they sure as hell didn't in the case of Three Houses. Now, if you have never played Fire Emblem Three Houses and have somehow remained unspoiled for it, get a copy of it, then choose Black Eagles or Blue Lions based on which you like the vibes of more. If that's Blue Lions, do not recruit any other student and go wild. If that's Black Eagles, recruit Lysithea only and follow a spoiler-free guide to get the Crimson Flower ending. Seriously, listen to my advice. It is good advice. Just like Three Houses is a good game despite its flaws, when you don't have people yapping on about bloody Edelgard versus Dimitri discourse in your ears. This, by the way, is a long-winded way of me saying this video is not spoiler-free, and that I am about to drop some very big spoilers, like right now. Okay, now that I've hopefully driven off the rare breed who somehow remained unspoiled about Three Houses in the year of our Lord 2026, I'm going to drive off even more people. Specifically, if you are incapable of nuance, aka you are one of those people perpetuating Edelgard versus Dimitri discourse, stop this video and polish up on your media literacy skills for all of our sakes. Please, I'm begging you. Edelgard is not the Antichrist. She does things wrong, yes, but she's ultimately trying to, destroy feudalism, which is a very good goal. She is not a fascist. She is literally the opposite of a fascist. She gives up power almost immediately in all of her endings. She is not trying to be the new god queen here. Dimitri is not the Antichrist. He does things wrong, yes, but he's ultimately trying to, stop his home from being invaded, which is a very understandable goal. He kinda is a brutal murderer, but he gets over it. This is a very important fact for people to understand. Claude is not the Antichrist. That would require him to do things, which he doesn't. Rhea is not the Antichrist. She does a lot of messed up things, yes, but she is a deeply traumatized genocide survivor trying to preserve her culture. She should not be in any position of power, sure, but she doesn't perpetuate a harmful system because she likes hurting people or anything ridiculous like that. I digress. While it's very understandable for people to have a favourite lord, I'm on Team Edelgard personally. If you are incapable of thinking of any of these characters in anything other than shades of black or white, please stop watching this video. I am not interested in your thoughts and opinions, and I will remorselessly delete any comments that contribute to ridiculous Lords discourse that got tiring over half a decade ago. Now that I have hopefully nipped a migraine before it's even formed, it's time for me to actually get on with this video. Three Houses is great, but as I said earlier, Three Houses is a good game. Do I think there are other Fire Emblems with better gameplay? Yes, absolutely yes. The map design is kinda bad compared to many of the other entrances in the series, and I think the sheer and utter flexibility of the character class system, combined with the fact that 3 or 4 of said classes are better than all of the others, causes some problems. But Three Houses also has some fun, unique mechanics, such as demonic beast encounters and gambits. To be blunt, the 3D visuals aren't fantastic, but honestly, I really do not care about that as long as it's not like Scarlet and Violet tier awful. The character designs, especially post-time skip, and 2D portraits are generally good, and that matters a lot more to me. When it comes to the animated cutscenes and CGs, some are good, some are bad, and there is a, let's just say, very interesting trend when it comes to that, which I will be talking about quite a lot in this video's sequel/sequels. Where Three Houses really shines is with its character writing and world building, both of which are fantastic. Fodlan has over 1,000 years of history, with numerous events throughout those centuries having shaped the lives of everyone in Fodlan's modern day. Each of the countries in Fodlan, the Adrestian Empire, the Kingdom of Fargus, and the Leicester Alliance, have their own cultures, values, and aesthetics. Beyond that, even the world around Fodlan gets some development. There are playable characters from neighbouring countries such as Dagda, Elmira, and Brigid, and Elmira and Duska are both pivotal to the game's lore. And when it comes to the characters, well, there's a reason I had to go on that big rant at the start of the video, because Three Houses makes you feel strong emotions about its cast. Fire Emblem as a series is kinda known for generally having pretty tropey characters, which, considering most games have 20 or more playable ones, is extremely understandable. But while Three Houses does have a few characters like that, most of them feel like actual human beings. Let's study Sylvain as a really good example of Three Houses' character writing. On paper, he is the flirty archetype, which is a common staple of the series, including characters such as Sane, Inigo, Virion, etc. Except Sylvain is actually a complete and utter deconstruction of this archetype. Why is he flirty? Because as a possessor of a crest, a gene-based superpower, he is viewed as prime breeding stock. He knows, deep in his heart, that he is desirable by Fodlan's society, and therefore women in Fodlan's society, not because of his looks or personality, but because he can potentially make super powerful crest babies. And Sylvain resents the ever-loving hell out of that. So, out of a twisted sense of revenge or justice, he gives women the attention he knows they want. He gets what he needs out of them, aka physical and emotional affection, and then casually breaks their hearts, using them the way he's convinced they were planning to use him. Naturally, of course, not all women want to use him to further their social status, and the game makes it very clear that Sylvain is in the wrong for his, let's be blunt, misogyny. On the flip side, however, Sylvain's mentality when it comes to women is also understandable. He makes poor, harmful decisions due to a combination of the society he grew up in and his own unique personal traumas, just like an actual human being does. Sylvain isn't just a one-note arsehole either, even if my description made him sound that way. He genuinely loves his childhood friends and doesn't try his usual antics on Bernadetta, one of the most timid members of the cast. Plus, depending on your choices, he can fully grow out of his boy era and enter a healthy relationship with one of several different women in the cast. Or he can have an angsty torrid love affair with Felix. It's up to you. Now though, we need to talk about Three Houses' plot, which is what I personally believe is the game's Achilles heel, as most of the non-plot problems are directly the result of the storytelling choices. Three Houses is split into two parts. The First, there's the introduction, White Clouds, which is followed by a time skip that leads into either Crimson Flower, Azure Moon, Verdant Winds, or Silver Snow, depending on your choices. To be blunt, however, all of the post-time skip routes are riddled with problems. And I firmly believe these problems were caused by the developers not having enough time to polish and differentiate said routes. To explain my reasoning, this video is going to analyze White Clouds to show you guys how much of a masterpiece it truly is, when you're not replaying it back to back 3 times in a row, that is. The second part of this series will then go into the post-time skip routes to show how they all kinda lose the plot. Before I start this, however, I want to talk about the point of Three Houses. Specifically, what is its story trying to do? The answer is that Three Houses is telling a tragedy. If the 3 main lords, the rulers of each country in Fodlan, were willing to open their hearts to each other and actually talk about their goals and dreams, they could have achieved said dreams together. None of their end goals fundamentally conflict with each other. Edelgard wants to end the crest-based nobility system, something that in some endings, though more on this when I talk about Azure Moon, Dimitri eventually comes to agree with. Dimitri wants to find out the truth behind the tragedy of Dusker and make the perpetrators face justice, something which Edelgard would absolutely be in agreement with, considering what they did to her family. Finally, Claude wants to end Fodlan's xenophobia and open its borders, which both of the other lords presumably have no issue with, given Dimitri watched a genocide occur due to said xenophobia and is still furious about it to this day, and Edelgard wants to depower the church whose teaching caused said xenophobia to begin with. Except, they don't talk. In fact, due to each of their respective traumas, they can't talk. Dimitri's trauma makes him obsessive and irrational, and as a result of that, he jumps to the conclusion that Edelgard is responsible for the tragedy of Dusker, something he only realizes is blatantly ridiculous once it's far, far too late for peace. Edelgard, meanwhile, has trust issues the size of a mountain due to her knowledge that there is a group of evil shapeshifters out there who love stealing people's identities. Combined with the fact her twin crests are going to kill her sooner rather than later, she jumps to the false conclusion that she alone can change the country and that she doesn't have the time to waste on lengthy extended diplomacy that would probably require compromises she's not willing to make. While Claude isn't quite as messed up as the other lords, he too has his issues. Persecution he faced in his homeland of Almyra for being mixed race, a persecution that was simply flipped when he came to his mother's homeland, leads to him keeping his heritage a tightly lidded secret, which causes problems. He refuses to be open with people, so deeply obscuring his past that you never even get his true name revealed in the main story. His inability to open up to the other lords, despite getting the perfect opportunity to do so with Edelgard, makes him unable to make substantial alliances with either of them, and prevents him from making any meaningful contribution to the game's conflict without Byleth, the player character, to help him. On the topic of Byleth, no matter what decisions they make, there is no path where they can save everyone. While the war eventually leads to a golden age for Fodlan, it always comes at a horrendous cost. Edelgard forces the player to kill her in all routes other than her own, either because she knows she's beaten and it's the only way to end the now pointless bloodshed quickly, or because she refuses to relent, not trusting the heavily church-aligned and previously mentally unstable Dimitri with Fodlan's future. Dimitri, meanwhile, succumbs to his mental illness in Silver Snow and Verdant Wind, throwing away his life pointlessly in Grondo Field, and gets used as a sacrificial puppet by Rhea in Crimson Flower, dying for her church, only for her to burn 30 to the ground in return. While Claude generally fares okay in most routes, his friends aren't necessarily so lucky and may sacrifice their lives for him and their homeland, only for Claude to eventually flee the country, the alliance dissolving in his absence. Even Rhea cuts a tragic figure in some routes. The flawed but charitable leader succumbs to madness in Crimson Flower, becoming the very monster Edelgard suspected she was. In Verdant Wind, she sacrifices her life to save the main cast, and, unless romanced, Byleth is forced to put her down in Silver Snow, meaning they lose both their treasured student along with the woman they chose over her. As I said, Three Houses is a tragedy, and I will be judging the story based on how well it succeeds in doing that in my chapter-by-chapter breakdown of... I am going to give a brief recap of each chapter in the story, followed by an explanation of what it contributes to the game's plot, gameplay, and themes. Prologue: An inevitable encounter. The game starts with a very impressive animated cutscene of Saint Seros brutally stabbing Nemesis to death after defeating him in battle, before cradling his weapon, the Sword of the Creator. A series of images then flash on screen, before the camera cuts to a young girl with pointed ears sitting on a throne, Sophus. The game then transitions to the character creation menu as Sophus asks more questions about you. The player character, whom I will be referring to with their canonical name, Byleth, then wakes up from what turns out to be a dream. Their father and fellow mercenary, Geralt Eisner, talks to them a bit, before 3 teenagers appear, asking for their help. A group of bandits is after them, apparently, and reluctantly, Geralt agrees to give them his aid. The tutorial battle then occurs, letting the player use all 3 lords and Byleth, and introduces the combat basics. After defeating the leader of the bandits, Costas, it turns out he's not quite as down for the count as everyone expected, and he launches himself at a surprised Edelgard, who doesn't have the time to do anything but withdraw a dagger, which has a weapon triangle disadvantage against giant axes. Byleth, however, throws themselves between them, and Costas' axe is a second away from tearing through their neck before time suddenly stops. Byleth gets transported back to Sophus' throne room, and after she chews them out, and reveals she has plot-important amnesia, Sophus rewinds time, allowing Byleth to get the drop on Costas this time around. The bandits flee just before Alois, a member of the Knights of Seros, arrives. He is shocked to see Geralt, who turns out to be his former captain. He insists Geralt accompany them back to Garrick Mach Monastery, and Geralt very reluctantly agrees. The 3 teenagers, Edelgard, Claude, and Dimitri, however, are more interested in Byleth. It turns out they are the heirs to the Adrestian Empire, the Leicester Alliance, and the Holy Kingdom of Fargust, respectively. And each of them are very keen to recruit Byleth to their sides. Byleth analyzes each leader, concluding that Edelgard has lofty standards, Dimitri's kindness hides darkness, and that Claude's irreverentness is just an act. Suffice to say, Byleth is underestimating Edelgard, overestimating Claude, and, well, okay, yeah, they're spot on about Dimitri. As most prologues are, this is the establishing chapter. Instantly, there's a flashback of the conflict that the player will ultimately discover led to the game's plot, and the mystery of Sophus, the time-controlling dragon girl in your head, is established. We meet Geralt, and also get some insight into his and Byleth's relationship. The player gets a quick introduction to each of the main lords, getting insight into their personality, potential hidden depths, and, just as importantly, their gameplay styles. While minor in the grand scheme of things, it's important information for the next chapter, when Byleth chooses a house. Finally, the player is also given a bit of world building, with the 3 main countries in Fodlan being introduced, along with the presence of the Church of Seros and Garreg Mach, even if those two don't get as much spotlight. I'd say that this is ultimately a chapter that does its job. It gives a bit of exposition and sets up the dynamics between all of the main characters except for Rhea. While I wouldn't say that the Lords or Geralt are that compelling yet, there's enough meat on their bones for the player to get interested in learning more. On the flip side, the opening flashback and Sophus's Miracle are great hooks, and were definitely what intrigued me the most during my first playthrough of the game. Chapter 1: Three Houses. This chapter starts with an animated cutscene that shows off the Archbishop Rhea, Garreg Mach Monastery, and its students. As you meet the Archbishop and her assistant, Seteth, it's clear Geralt has some beef with her, and Seteth has beef with you. Since for no real discernible reason, Rhea decides to make Byleth a professor at Garreg Mach's Officers' Academy. Your fellow professors Hanuman and Manuela then explain the 3 houses to you, with black eagles, blue lions, and golden deer, which do not specialize in different weapon types, no matter what the game tells you. After another animated cutscene, you explore the monastery for the first time, getting introduced to the minor students in each house. Once that's done, Byleth chooses which house they want to go with, and Hanuman discovers they have a mysterious crest, a magical, bloodline-based superpower. The calendar system is introduced, along with side quests, and the chapter eventually ends with a mock battle between the houses. Depending on which house you choose, either Ferdinand or Lorenz will break ranks, ruining one of your opponent's strategies and leaving victory for Byleth's taking. Your students are pleased, and Rhea congratulates you before introducing you to next month's mission, bandit hunting. Sophus then starts speaking to Byleth, and it turns out she's in your head for some reason. Not that that comes as much surprise. It then cuts to Kostas, who's yelling at this mysterious person called the Flame Emperor, who hired him to kill the Lords. The Flame Emperor has no sympathy for Kostas' plight, however, and teleports away, leaving him to the Knights. This is one half an establishing chapter, and one half a calm before the storm one. Rhea, Seteth, and your future students are all introduced, and most importantly, you have to talk to everyone, getting you attached at least a little bit to students who don't ultimately end up in your house. This is going to be quite important post-time skip when you have to murder some of them. This chapter also introduces the monastery, a hub world you can optionally choose to explore. While the franchise has been experimenting with hub worlds for a while, introducing My Castle in Fates and the villages in Echoes, the monastery is significantly more immersive than either of them. You can talk to every playable character, overhear conversations between them and NPCs, and get their input on current events. This hugely fleshes out the cast, while also contributing to the game's world building. On the topic of world building, the library, NPC conversations, and even items you find lying around all contribute to Fodlan's lore and help the world feel as immersive as it does. While the monastery is not perfect, something I'll be talking more about later, the game at least has the decency to slow burn beginner players into it, with large portions blocked off initially, which open up over the months. The mock battle, meanwhile, while being somewhat nothing from a combat standpoint, is very fun from a narrative one. Yet again, it does some great heavy lifting when it comes to characterization, and is a very silly, light-hearted romp that gets you attached to your students quickly, while also fleshing out the other houses a bit. While the battle itself is fairly simple, as I mentioned before, there is one fun element about it, however, if you are playing on classic mode. Namely, that permadeath is disabled for this fight. I just think that's a neat bit of ludonarrative harmony that deserves a shout. All in all, It's not a super plot-heavy chapter by any means, but it does the heavy lifting it needs to in the lead up to Chapter 2, Familiar Scenery, aka where the game gets good. While the knights spend the month hunting Kostas down, mechanics such as tutoring, battalions, faculty training and recruiting are introduced to the player. Eventually though, the bandits are found in Xanadu, the Red Canyon, a holy site to the church. Your students tend to be either excited or indifferent about their mission. However, Sophus is far more concerned given the church is sending literal teenagers into an active battlefield. Because of that, she gives Byleth access to the Divine Pulse, an ability that allows them to turn back time with limits, and allows the player to undo any turns they completely mess up. Even if none of your students die, however, they sure as hell get traumatized, because for many of them, they are killing people for the first time, and to react to defeating a foe with horror, sadness, or honestly just as chillingly, excitement or indifference. Eventually, after most likely giving several playable characters PTSD, Kostas is defeated, and Byleth and Sophus take a moment to sightsee. Despite never having been there before, both of them feel like the canyon is familiar for some reason. Returning to Garruk Mach, Blue Lions players get an exclusive cutscene where Dimitri seems oddly concerned for Edelgard as she goes out for her month's mission. Feelings that are clearly not returned, as she very blatantly finds his worry somewhat patronizing. Byleth prods Dimitri about the odd interaction, but he stays mum. The Roots reunite in the audience chamber, where Rhea gives some exposition about the church's teachings, specifically that the goddess used to live amongst mortals, which makes Sophus ponder if she may have lived in Xanadu during the goddess's era. Oh, Sophus, if only you knew. Man, I love this chapter. Before the time skip was revealed, everyone was joking about Three Houses being Fire Emblem Harry Potter. By the way, screw JKR, and if you don't think trans women are women, go away. I digress. Most people thought Three Houses was going to be a fairly light-hearted romp. I mean, it was set in a school of all places, and Chapter 1 absolutely plays into that. But then this chapter comes around, and a bunch of teenagers are forced by the church into committing murder. And act like a bunch of teenagers who have been forced into committing murder. Nothing like this has ever occurred in any of the Fire Emblem games I've played. Yes, sometimes characters have expressed regret and sadness about having to fight people, but generally, killing an enemy unit is just no big deal. But in Fodlan, enemy units are treated as people, and killing them, even for the right reason, is an act that carries weight. And this is the moment where the Three Houses is Fire Emblem Harry Potter jokes died, and the Three Houses is Fire Emblem Game of Thrones memes began. Because this chapter is the prelude to the direction the game will ultimately go in. The moment that Three Houses tells you it's going to be far darker than Fire Emblem's usual standard. Chapter 3, Mutiny in the Mist. Lord Leonardo, the adoptive father of Ash of the Blue Lions, rebels against the church, and Rhea tasks Byleth's class with cutting down any stragglers in order to teach the students that it is futile to stand up against the church. Yes, she literally says that out loud. Catherine, a Knight of Ceros who wields the Hero's Relic Thunderbrand, is sent to back you up, and the player is introduced to the lore of the 10 heroes and their weapons, which are apparently gifts from the goddess herself. The tragedy of Duska, aka when Fargus committed genocide in response to the supposed murder of their king, is also brought up for the first time in the main plot. Lenato's son was supposedly implicated in the attack and not so supposedly executed by the church for it. Suffice to say, Lenato was rather pissed off by that. A supernatural fog then fills the air, and surprise! You get ambushed by the civilian militia along with a weird dark mage. After killing the mage, the fog clears and a rather specky animated cutscene occurs, showing a Thunderbrand and revealing that Lenato and Catherine have beef. Remember this cutscene, as it will be very important to what this video is about. After you kill Lenato and end the fight, things diverge a bit as your house reconvenes. Edelgard respects the citizens Lenato used in his army, saying it would be patronizing to dismiss them as naive victims taken advantage of by their lord, and admits that she too would be willing to sacrifice her people for the greater good, as certain things are worth dying for. Dmitri, meanwhile, is upset by the situation. He doesn't really think all the death was worth it, even if Lenato's cause was genuinely just. Dmitri wonders if things could have been different if Lenato and the church were willing to reach out their hands to each other before his grudge against them grew so dire. Oh yeah, and Ash is also having a breakdown in the background. Claude, meanwhile, is more interested in Thunderbrand than Lenato's army, bringing up an old legend about a hero's relic that could cut a mountain in two, something he seems pretty fascinated by. He then gets some more information on his family history, and it turns out all of this nobles and church stuff is new to Claude too, as he used to live with his father's family until last year. After those scenes wrap up, Catherine reappears with bad news. On Lenato's body, there were plans for an assassination attempt on Rhea on the day of the goddess's rite of rebirth. I sincerely don't get how people can view the church as ooh good guys after this chapter, since bloody hell. While there's been some mutterings about the Church of Ceros being a little bit dodgy before this point, this is the first time Rhea begins to drop the benevolent act. Catherine's intro and the debut of the first hero's relic is also a beautiful bit of animation, and a brilliant metric of how much all of the post-time skip stuff was crunched. Yes, that is why I said this was important. Lenato stops being relevant 2 chapters from now, and Catherine is only ever really important in Crimson Flower, where she serves as Rhea's chief thug. The only major thing this animation does is establish what a hero's relic is, which really could have just been a CG, since, spoilers, we're getting an animation about another one next chapter, and oh boy, there's plenty of CGs later on that really wanted to be animated cutscenes instead. The tragedy surrounding Ash is some top-tier stuff, as we are murdering his adoptive father, and the game does not shy away from that. It's a morally complicated situation, with various characters all having different takes on both Lenato's actions and the church's response to them. It's a reflection of the way the story eventually unfolds, where no side is entirely right, but no side is entirely wrong. There's also some good lore drops this chapter, from the 10 heroes to the Cliff Notes version of the Tragedy of Dusker, and I do really enjoy each of the Lord's moments at the chapter's end. Edelgard and Dimitri's scenes do a great job of foreshadowing their character arcs. Edelgard is willing to make hard sacrifices and bloody her hands for the greater good, and generally respects commoners' autonomy more than the other lords. Dmitri espouses the virtues of reaching out to people meanwhile, which is a big motif in Azure Moon, while also showing some of his temper. Claude's is also interesting, though less interesting than the others, since the implication that he might want to destroy the mountains between Fodlan and Almyra is dropped after the time skip because his route is an utter letdown. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now and save that rant for when I eventually get to Verdant Winds. Chapter 4: The Goddess's Rite of Rebirth. All of the houses have been tasked with protecting Rhea this month, but Byleth's students realize that the assassination attempt is a diversion. Instead, you get given a quest where you find clues all over the monastery, eventually discovering that the real target is the Holy Mausoleum, where Ceres's bones are supposedly kept. Byleth intercepts the grave robbers, a series of priests and odd mages, and has to defeat them before a certain amount of turns pass. This is made challenging by the presence of traps, along with an ominous dark knight, the Death Knight, who is basically unkillable without some crazy luck or a heavily invested Lysithea. Luckily, as long as you avoid him, he won't challenge you, as he thinks you're a bunch of weaklings. Once Byleth reaches the mage opening Ceres' coffin, however, they are too late. The mage finishes opening it up to reveal a hero's relic of all things, specifically the whip sword wielded by Nemesis in the prologue. Byleth takes the relic from the mage, and somehow it activates. Unlike Thunderbrand, however, it's missing a crest stone, which is what's meant to give the device its powers in the first place. The battle ends, and Rhea executes the surviving enemies, dismissing them as members of the rebellious Western Church, despite some hints otherwise. It then cuts to a fellow called Lord Arundel, who's talking to the Flame Emperor. He reveals that Byleth's new relic is the Sword of the Creator, which is wielded by the thief Nemesis. Cutting back to Rhea, she gives Byleth the sword, much to Seteth's annoyance, since why the hell is she entrusting this random nobody with a sacred relic that apparently drove its last wielder mad with power? Rhea is like, "Trust me, bro!" And that is that. Unless you're a Golden Deer, where it's revealed that Claude was eavesdropping, and that he once wanted the Sword of the Creator for himself, though he acknowledges he's not sure if he could even use it, given the condition it's in. This chapter is one half Byleth getting a super sick sword, and one half a lore dump. Something I really appreciate about White Clouds in general is that it's happy to bring things up without explaining them instantly, and letting the player sit with them for a while before giving the deets. Mentions of Nemesis and Heroes' relics have peppered the story until now, but it's only now that we're getting the full details, which all turn out to be complete nonsense, but details schmetails, and I do love that Three Houses, and by that I mainly mean the church, just flat out lies to you. I love that characters twist the lore to suit their own ends, and others act on faulty assumptions of it. I'll talk about that more in Crimson Flowers section, however. Back to the start of the chapter though, I do love the information gathering quest that happens throughout this arc. I'm a big mystery fan, and I think the plot important monastery quests do a really good job at fleshing out the characters and world. On the topic of mystery, this chapter gives the players a lot of questions. What's the deal with the Sword of the Creator? Why can Byleth use it even when it's incomplete? What is the true significance of it, given everyone's extreme reactions towards it? Where are Ceres' bones? And what's Nemesis' real deal, since it's clear we've only got half of his plot? This chapter adds a bucket load of intrigue, which is always great to have in a story, along with a cool, iconic anime weapon to give Byleth that extra bit of punch. Which, yeah, I used to really like shonen manga. I'm not immune to whip blades. When I say punch though, I don't just mean aura. I mean stats. Because next up is... Chapter 5, Tower of Black Winds. Rhea tasks Byleth and co with hunting down Miklan, Sylvain of the Blue Lion's disinherited older brother, after he stole their familial hero's relic, the Lance of Ruin. Miklan can't use it, since he lacks a crest, which was the root cause of why he was disinherited to begin with, but she reckons it's better to be safe than sorry. In the Blue Lion's route, Rodrigue, Felix's father, and a parental figure for Dimitri is introduced, while in the Golden Deer, Judith comes and informs Claude that his grandfather is sick and he's needed back home for a bit. Afterwards, Hanneman reveals that Byleth has the Fire Emblem, Crest of Flames, which funnily enough is Nemesis's crest. There's also a small mission that month which reveals Byleth's mother is buried at Garrick Mach, despite that contradicting Gerald's story of your origins. While I can't find the specifics of when it unlocks online, the first of Edelgard's sea supports also becomes available around this point, and given the events in it, absolutely should have been a mandatory part of the plot, and I needed to access the Crimson Flower route, I want to include them in the recaps. Byleth stumbles across Edelgard having a nightmare, and she admits she was dreaming of her siblings. Edelgard reveals that she once had 10 of them, and all of them died slow, horrific deaths in mysterious circumstances, leaving her heir to both the throne and their legacies. Fun stuff, that. Once the month ends, you are joined by Gilbert on your mission to defeat Miklan, who sucks in every way imaginable. Seriously, if you are genuinely a Gilbert fan, please let me know, as I have literally never seen one in my life. After beating back Miklan, however, the battle doesn't end. Instead, a bunch of horrifying gloop bursts from the Lance of Ruin, taking over his body and turning him into a demonic beast which you have to put down. And this is where you get introduced to the Sword of the Creator's special ability, and that's that it does extra damage to monster enemies. Yay! Upon returning to the monastery, Rhea organises a cover-up, and in the Black Eagles and Blue Lions routes, there's some musing about whether or not crests should really be able to dictate someone's destiny, like what happened to Miklan. In the Black Eagles, there's then a scene where Hubert chides Edelgard over revealing her overt anti-crests stance to Byleth, and after he leaves her on her own, Edelgard laments that her dreams will almost be impossible to achieve without help, but promises her father that she won't give up on her goals either way. In Golden Deer, meanwhile, Claude is approached by the librarian Thomas, who reveals that over the years, other wielders of the hero's relics have lost themselves, turning into black beasts, something the church has covered up. Afterwards, Edelgard approaches Claude, offering to swap a secret for a secret, but Claude brushes her off, so she starts grilling him invasively instead. In the end, he reveals he has an extremely vague dream he's looking for allies to help achieve, and tells Edelgard he'll tell her more about him if she agrees to help him unconditionally. For obvious reasons, she says no and leaves. As the chapter ends, Rhea is about to give Byleth their next mission, when Seth bursts into the audience chamber and reveals his sister Flane is missing. Grey and grey morality, let's go! Okay, for real though, this chapter is fantastic when it comes to the world building, and more importantly, setting up the central premise of the conflict in the actually important routes. There have been plenty of moments before this stage where crests have been viewed with a somewhat negative light, especially in the supports, but this is the moment where that becomes center stage. Miklan might have actually made something of himself if he hadn't been ostracized from his family since birth, but because he was, he pillaged and hurt people before eventually meeting a horrifically grisly end. And more importantly, misused heroes' relics, aka the obviously evil bone weapons, turned people into literal monsters. It is becoming very clear that there is something deeply messed up with this whole heroes' relic crest system. We also get some really good character moments for our 4 main lords here. This chapter just furthers the previously established control Rhea exerts over Fodlan. with her hushing up Miquella's story as it risks the systems she established if the truth that heroes' relics are not so divine after all comes out. Dimitri, meanwhile, as the king of centrism, tries to both sides are wrong things. Okay, I jest. He explains the pro-crest argument, specifically that they serve as a military deterrent against foreign invasion, which is not completely invalid, as the DLC makes it very clear that Rhea is deliberately holding back Fodlan's technological development, and that they are behind their peers otherwise. In the end, Dimitri laments that he just wishes people could learn to accept each other, but also acknowledges that this isn't entirely feasible, as everyone's got things they can't accept even about themselves. Foreshadowing, teehee. On the topic of foreshadowing, Edelgard. Oh, Edelgard. I love her moments in both the Black Eagles and Golden Deer routes here. Let's talk about the first though. Edelgard's hinted at some anti-establishment sentiments for a while now, but this chapter she goes full mask off and flat out blames the crest system giving societal power to those who don't deserve it, while robbing those who do of the opportunity to rule for Fodlan's messed up state. She tells Byleth that she thinks Fodlan will be better off with no goddess and no crests. Hell yeah, commit some blasphemy, my queen. This is also the first time it's explicitly implied Edelgard is up to something, and I know that history hooked me a lot during my first blind playthrough. Finally, let's yap about the Golden Deer scene. I think this is very interesting when juxtaposed against the Black Eagles one, as it is clear that Edelgard, and to a lesser degree Tomas, are scouting Claude out as a potential ally. And while this scene isn't portrayed as a sad one by any means, I think it's the first example of what truly makes Three Houses a tragedy. In Black Eagles, it's made clear that Edelgard is looking for support during this stage of the story. But then she totally bungles her attempt at talking to Claude, and neither of the lords are willing to open up at all, for reasons I mentioned in this video's introduction. It's especially poignant in hindsight, with the release of the spin-off game Free Hopes proving just how aligned Edelgard and Claude's goals are. Away from Edelgard and onto Tomas, I really like the idea of Claude capturing the Agarthan's attention in a good way, which is still bad for him, but details, schmeetails. I like how Tomas positions himself as a mentor figure for Claude. I like it, and with everything else that I like about the Golden Deer route, I wish the game had done anything of substance with it. The last thing I want to talk about this chapter is the gameplay. This chapter introduces monster enemies, giant 4-tile plus units with multiple HP bars and massive stats that are protected by a barrier and use choreographed multi-tile moves. They have a one Three Houses gameplay mechanic that really stands out to me, and in a good way. Fire Emblem tends to have a slight problem with boss units, in that they tend not to be that hard, or they are basically practically unkillable unless you're using certain weapons or a certain unit or what have you. These monster foes are a great way to add a bit of extra strategy to boss and mini-boss battles. They require you to use your units carefully. Do you want to break the barrier this turn? Or stagger the monster later when you have more vulnerable units in its range? Do you want to burn a gambit now and risk not being able to use it later? Or do you hold on to it and potentially let one of your units get murked? All in all, the devs are cooking with this one. Chapter 6. Rumours of a Reaper. Rhea tasks you with aiding the knights to hunt down Flame, who is believed to still be within Garrick Mark's walls. Setis' previously snooty and suspicious behaviour is all gone, replaced by fear. He brings up that the town has lately been filled with rumours of a mysterious Death Knight terrorising the streets during the evening, which certainly isn't helping his nerves. Later that night, in the Blue Lions route, Byleth spots Dedu, Dimitri's retainer, patrolling the monastery. Together, they find Dimitri in the library, who excuses himself from them in a hurry and leaves behind the books he was looking at. For some reason, Dimitri is looking at records of donations to the church, specifically those of Lord Arundel, who suddenly stopped making them 6 years ago. The player is then automatically made to explore the monastery, where they need to gather clues on their quest to find the culprit. There's a few names floating around the monastery. Most importantly, Shamir and Dedu are both suspected due to xenophobia, and Tomas has apparently been asking odd questions about Geralt and Flame. Eventually though, Violet figures out that the culprit is Yaritza, a combat instructor. Manuela connected the dots before you, however, confronting him in his office and getting herself stabbed. Hanuman borrows your lord, demanding they help him escort Manuela to the infirmary, while the rest of your class follows Byleth down the hidden passageway Yaritza fled into. Unsurprisingly, they find Flame there, along with another unknown girl and the Death Knight. Even after clearing the map, the Death Knight is still raring to go, but then the Flame Emperor appears, telling him to stand down before they both warp away. Seteth thanks Byleth for saving his sister, finally warming up to them. He reveals that Flame has unusual blood that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. All Fire Emblem veterans should instantly guess that she is a dragon girl at this point. Flame then joins your class so you can keep an eye on her. Later on, Rhea summons Byleth, and it's revealed that the other girl is called Monica, and was a member of last year's Black Eagle House. While she technically rejoins her class, she isn't a playable unit even if you're on the Black Eagles route. Rhea then reveals that the Battle of the Eagle and Lion is to be held next month, a massive mock battle that's basically the student event of the year. Byleth asks Geralt to attend, but alas, he's busy, and instead sets up some death flags by revealing to Byleth that there's been a lot of strange groups spotted around the place lately, along with knights showing up dead, so if anything happens to him, they need to search his room nook and cranny. This chapter is another build-up one, packaged in the form of a fun, tense whodunit, which also helps introduce White Cloud's ultimate whodunit, aka the mystery of the Flame Emperor's identity. The atmosphere of suspicion is bolstered by the monastery's usual theme changing, and Seteth is the nice little bow tying everything together. Seeing the usually serious, critical man you've known since chapter 1 be brought to such a state really just amps up the emotional impact of this chapter. You want to save Flame, if only for him. And if you are playing the game blind and have picked up on Three Houses' tone, you'd know that wasn't a guarantee. This chapter also starts connecting the threads between all the antagonistic forces in Fodlan. The Death Knight, the Rite of Rebirth, Costas. All of these threads are slowly weaving together now that White Clouds has officially reached its midpoint. There's a conspiracy targeting Garrick Mach, even if, as of yet, the player doesn't know why. There's also a few dribbles of foreshadowing in here. As I said, this is the first chapter Geralt makes it clear that he's doomed. Well, beyond simply being a father in Fire Emblem anyway. Your main lord being absent during the Flame Emperor's appearance is either a nice little red herring in the Blue Lions and Golden Deer routes, or another hint in the Black Eagles one. And then there's Flame's blood. This isn't actually as relevant as it seems story-wise. The implication is that the Agarthans use it to either make artificial crest stones or demonic beasts, which is more important gameplay-wise than story-wise in the grand scheme of things, with one exception. Finally, this is the first chapter I have an actual critique of. No, my constant japes at the Golden Deer's expense doesn't count. Specifically, this chapter has a bit of a ludonarrative problem. The story encourages you to pursue Yaritza immediately. However, doing so automatically makes the game skip to the end of the month, costing you free time and tutoring lessons, even if all your units do rank up in their focus areas. This makes it far more sensible to not pursue Yuritsa, which the player can do, which completely undermines the tension of the chapter. Like, what is the point of having a whodunit if you don't need to actually solve it? There isn't any, that's what. Intelligent systems should have 1. Removed the choice, and either A. automatically skip to the end of the month with no way of circumventing that, or B. just let the player use the remaining weekends in the month how they pleased, with only the mission day getting skipped. Or 2. Made Flame go missing just before the month's end, with what was supposed to be your mission getting replaced by the search for her. I assume they didn't want to go with 1A, however, as I can see a certain section of the fanbase whining about it, and 1B might not have been feasible to program in a sensible time limit. Remember, this game was probably crunched. 2, on the flip side, would have angered a different annoying section of the fanbase, because why does everything happen at the end of the month? I still think this is a good chapter, don't get me wrong, but it's held back a little bit by Three Houses' gameplay systems. It's going to be a while before I'm this critical about another chapter again, which really, given how much of a hater I am, is a pretty big testament to Three Houses' writing. Chapter 7, Field of the Eagle and Lion. Unlike last month's tension, spirits are high as the students prepare for the mock battle, with a cute little fishing tournament also being held to lift Flame's spirits. Back to the fight though, many years ago, the Empire and Fargus once battled on Adrestia's Gronda Field, and in the following centuries, it's become an officers' academy tradition for each of the three houses to follow their ancestors' footsteps and duel each other in a far less bloody confrontation. There's an animated cutscene before the battle starts, with each of the three lords bantering for a bit before ordering their armies to attack. Of course, Bylif's house wins, and afterwards, Claude proposes a feast. Once that's done, Bylif gets a small scene with their lord. Edelgard admits fighting under them makes her happy, and that even once she becomes emperor, she'll still be grateful for them. Dimitri, meanwhile, admits he low-key found Bylif kinda unnerving at first, but has grown to appreciate them the more he got to know them. Finally, Claude says he wishes that Bylif will fight by his side forever, though he also admits they wouldn't be having this conversation if Claude could just use the sword of the creator himself. Afterwards, Rhea briefs you about next month's mission. The citizens of Ramaya Village, where you first started the game, are apparently acting strangely. As you have probably noticed, this recap was quite short, and that's because, well, this chapter is honestly just fluff, which is a really good thing. Why? This short, sweet, fluffy filler chapter is the calm before the storm, a reprieve between the grimness of the last few chapters and the hurtle towards White Cloud's climax, which begins in the next. It's the last bit of unabashed joy in a narrative that is about to take a sharp turn for the worst. This is the last time the characters are ever going to be so happy. In any long story, downtime is vitally important. If a tale is unrelenting doom and gloom, or high-octane action scene after high-octane action scene, the audience gets fatigued. Everything begins to blur together, and people stop caring. There needs to be small moments like this chapter, with low stakes and time for the characters to just exist as themselves with no looming threats. The joy and camaraderie between the three houses in this chapter also serves as a perfect juxtaposition to the state of Fodlan after the time skip. The next time these people meet at Gronda Field, it won't be a mock battle, but a bloody fight to the death. On that note, while I don't have too much to say about the gameplay this chapter, yet again, It's another instance where permadeath is disabled even in classic mode, and I think that's neat. Chapter 8. The Flames in the Darkness. It looks like the mysterious ailment affecting Ramaya is being caused by magic, specifically dark magic. Because of that, Geralt is going to join you this month, but not as a playable unit, another flag to the pile he's slowly building up. There's then a brief route split where Byleth finds their lord. Edelgard seems oddly affected by the events unfolding in Ramaya and tells Byleth her suspicion that all of the strange incidents affecting Garruk Mach aren't connected and are instead caused by different parties wanting different things. Dimitri, meanwhile, is confronting Lord Arundel, noting that it's odd he's at the church given his falling out with them. Arundel makes up a clearly bogus excuse before asking about Edelgard, his niece, and farewelling Dimitri, his nephew. Turns out, Dimitri and Edelgard are step-siblings, which was why Dimitri was fretting over Edelgard all those chapters ago. Finally, Claude laments that he can't find Tomas, but that's fine. He's had a breakthrough in his research into heroes' relics. Specifically, he's discovered that the crest stones are what powers them, which makes it somewhat odd that the Sword of the Creator lacks one. More pressingly, he also thinks that Miklan's transformation into a demonic beast wasn't a flaw, but by design. He's found papers about a so-called Immaculate One, a big dragon with a crest stone in its chest that aided Seros' faithful back in the day. Alas, Seteth then appears, Loki freaks out, and takes Claude's book. As the month goes by, there's a mission from Seteth about missing students, which I'm sure is totally not foreshadowing in any way whatsoever. I also want to talk about Edelgard's C+ support here, as yet again, you needed to play Crimson Flower. She and Byleth meet at night, with Edelgard enjoying the breeze. She reveals that she and her siblings were imprisoned beneath the Imperial Palace on the Prime Minister, aka Ferdinand's father's, orders, and got cut up and experimented on in order to give them a major crest in an attempt to create the strongest emperor possible, which, as revealed in her C support, led to all of them but her dying horribly. Edelgard then reveals what said crest was. It was the Fire Emblem, aka your crest. Yeah. Finally though, the mission date arrives and Geralt fetches you in a tizzy. Turns out, a bunch of the villagers have been reduced to a manic, almost zombie-like state and are going on a rampage, burning and slaughtering everyone in their way, as a group of shady figures watch them. While Edelgard and Claude are horrified in a normal way when they see this, Dimitri completely loses his mind, going full mask off and ordering the Lions to brutally massacre the theorized perpetrators. It turns out the culprit is Tomas, who is not actually Tomas, but Solon, a vaguely inhuman dark mage with eerie white skin. To make matters worse, the Death Knight decides to show up too. If Byleth engages Solon in combat, he calls them the Fell Star, which I'm sure has no significance whatsoever. While Solon is defeated eventually, he teleports away, and your lord leaves Byleth and Geralt alone to look for survivors. Of course, that's the moment where the Flame Emperor pops up and Loki apologizes for what just happened. They are totally working together with Solon, yes, but it's not a match made in heaven and more one made in hell. The Flame Emperor then has the gall to ask Byleth to join their side so they can ditch Solon and achieve their shady goals with presumably less human experimentation. Naturally, Byleth and Geralt don't buy that at all, but before they can capture the Flame Emperor, they get interrupted by their lord's retainer, who is searching for said lord, which gives the Flame Emperor time to escape. Afterwards, there's a cute scene between Geralt and Byleth, where Geralt notes how happy teaching at the Office Academy has made them, and laments that maybe they didn't need to leave the monastery after all. Byleth notices the inconsistency, and Geralt tells him to meet him in his office when they've both got time to spare. The routes split yet again as the Lords process the aftermath of Ramaya. Edelgard asks about the Flame Emperor's recruitment attempt, musing that maybe one day the Flame Emperor will open up, revealing their truth, and give Byleth the chance to make an actual informed decision about whether they want to aid their goals. Monica then pops up and steals Edelgard away, which is also definitely not foreshadowing. Meanwhile, Dimitri apologizes for going full murder mode, though admits he can't view Solon or the Flame Emperor as anything but beasts that need to be put down. It turns out his unusual viciousness is caused by PTSD, with the chaos in Ramaya giving him a flashback to the tragedy of Duska, where his father, stepmother, and their knights were butchered in similar circumstances. He then reveals the only reason he came to the Officers' Academy to begin with was revenge. He wants to find the true perpetrators of the tragedy, aka not the racial minority that was blamed for it. And, well, it's clear once he gets his hands on them, nothing pretty is going to happen. Claude, meanwhile, admits that the incident was unpleasant, but believes that they also need to keep on smiling and not give in to despair. He and Byleth speculate on the Flame Emperor's motives for a bit, along with the implication that Solon kinda implied he might have used Flame's blood in said experiments. Either way, it's clear the church is hiding something. Afterward, Rhea summons Byleth to meet with her and Seteth. They're worried about what's going on, obviously, with Rhea speculating that their enemy could be an ancient, mysterious foe that has long wreaked havoc in Fodlan, even before the church's very existence, which freaks Seteth out a bit. He leaves, but before Byleth can follow him, Rhea expresses her belief that they are destined for great things, and prays that the goddess Sophis protects them. Naturally, the Sophis in your head begins to freak out and tells you to GTFO. God. Or maybe I should say goddess. Yeah, I love this chapter. The voice acting and sprite work truly contributes to just how utterly disturbing the Ramaya incident is. It's horrific, and really sets the groundwork for what I mentioned in the last chapter, about this being the moment where Three Houses' tone really solidifies. Mictlan, Flame's kidnapping, those were horrors the cast could bounce back from, but not this. Between the Flame Emperor, the Death Knight, and Solon dropping the Tomas Act, it's clear that the antagonists' schemes are beginning to reach their climax too. Garrick Mach's enemies are piling up. While the characters speculate on their motives, the player is still in the dark about what they could all possibly want, but it's clear from Solon's actions this chapter that it's probably not going to be anything pretty. Onto the topic of the church, it's clearer than ever that Rhea and Seteth are keeping you in the dark about something, especially if you're playing on the Diaz route. Between that and Geralt's secret about your birth, hidden motives upon hidden motives are piling up. While Three Houses as a collective is a tragedy, White Clouds also functions as a mystery. And on that note, let's talk about our lords and Sophis. This chapter will forever be burned in my mind, as this was the point where, in my completely blind Black Eagles run, I realised that Edelgard was the Flame Emperor, courtesy of both her C+ support and Hubert totally giving her the chance to escape. But yeah, putting 2 and 2 together after her awful recruitment attempt was indescribable, honestly, especially with that conversation you have with her afterwards, when she's like, maybe one day the Flame Emperor will actually tell you what's up. and maybe you'll want to join Ben Ben. Just a thought. Like, girl, holy shit, you are not subtle. Anyway, this is the moment I moved from liking Edelgard to having her rotate in my brain. I had no idea what she was up to. It was great. Back to my literary analysis. Even without the holy hell factor of predicting the twist, I think this is a hugely important Edelgard chapter. It's clear that the Flame Emperor is actually being honest here, and her appearance was a bit of really poorly handled damage control. She genuinely didn't know about Solon's plans, she did not approve of Solon's plans, and she'd ditch him and his allies like a hot potato if she thought it was possible. Something Three Hopes later confirms. All in all, I think this moment is a great showcase of the fact that Edelgard is a dumbass 18-year-old who, like all of the other 18-year-olds in this game, is out of her depth. Case in point, absolutely no one believed a word of what she was saying, because why the hell would they, given the combo wombo of her arrogance and refusal to explain like anything. Moving on to her post-mission appearance, it's clear that Edelgard wants Byleth to fight by her side, and not just because they're powerful in the Black Eagles route, but because she values Byleth as a person she desperately wants acceptance from, warts and all. This girl craves companionship so much, but also just does not have the ability to actually bloody communicate with people. Edelgard is a hot mess. And on the topic of hot messes, boy howdy, it's time to talk about Dimitri. It has been previously hinted at by Felix, the game, and occasionally Dimitri himself, that he has a hidden darkness. This chapter makes it really bloody clear that the so-called darkness is primarily period-typical untreated PTSD. I'll have a lot more to say in this topic when I get to Azure Moon, but the way Dimitri describes his mind going dark during his apology scene is just, yeah, bro had a flashback, and not an anime flashback, but an actual flashback where he lost track of reality and conflated one incident with another, with a part of himself going back to that night in Dusker. It's also really clear that Dimitri is still conflating the incidents, with him at least subconsciously believing that Solon and the Flame Emperor are connected to what happened in Dusker. Something that isn't exactly wrong in the former's case, but will cause a lot of problems in the latter's, especially considering the revelations earlier about his and Edelgard's relationship. We finally understand why he cares so much about her, even though his feelings aren't reciprocated due to Edelgard's implied trauma-induced memory issues that are revealed later on in Crimson Flower. I think this huge disconnect in their feelings towards each other is a really fun character choice. However, that's also a discussion that's best saved for the post-timeskip routes. On that topic, given the post-timeskip designs for Three Houses dropped before the game released, anyone who watched the trailers knew that Dimitri was going to snap at one point. This is the chapter that lays the groundwork to both why and how that's going to happen. Moving on to Claude, while he gets a lot less character work than the other lords as per usual, for once, he actually isn't completely cucked compared to them. First of all, Golden Deer is the only route where Solon's reveal has any impact, given his pseudo-mentorship to Claude. In fact, Solon and Claude's relationship is kind of the closest thing we get to a positive Agarthan-human relationship in the game. Solon didn't have to help Claude dig into the church's secrets. It didn't further his agenda in any way, but he did. Alas, like most of the Golden Deer's interesting plot threads, this gets dropped here, but yet again, that's really more of a Verdant Wind problem than it is a White Clouds one. Claude's musings on the Flame Emperor's motives are a bit more substantial, especially how, unlike the other lords, he's less focused on his personal drama and more focused on the fact that those who slither in the dark implied that they're going to escalate things, which is spot on the money. Claude also brings up that it's clear the higher ups at the church know more than they are letting on. But unlike before, where it was easy for him to reduce the church to a mere hurdle for him to overcome, he's beginning to realize things are much more complicated than they seem. Congratulations, Claude! Unlike the fandom, you've learnt what nuances! And more importantly, unlike most of the other Golden Deer plot threads introduced, gasp, Verdant Wind actually does something with this one! Yay! I think Claude's best moment, however, is when he actually goes into his mentality in this chapter. Specifically, his belief that good leaders need to keep smiling and to not give in to despair to boost the morale of those around them. Claude, as a whole, is generally a lot more cagey than the other lords. While Edelgard and Dimitri both keep big secrets, they're generally pretty honest in how they present themselves. Claude, meanwhile, is a lot more deceptive. He keeps all of his cards to his chest, which keeps most of his relationships friendly, but somewhat surface level, as people don't generally trust him that much, which his habit of prying into things doesn't help. Here, however, he shows a lot of genuine, selfless care to his friend and allies. He wants to push forwards, not for his own sake, but for the sake of those around him. It's a good bit. Finally though, we need to talk about the Sophist bombshell. This moment probably wasn't that surprising to most Fire Emblem veterans. Sophist follows all of the design trends they use for shape-shifting dragon deities. Anyone familiar with the series as a whole probably either guessed she was the goddess or was at least connected to them after the Xanadu chapter. They figured it out when she gave a whole "I am the beginning" speech. At the same time, I think if Three Houses was your first Fire Emblem game and you didn't have meta knowledge on your side, there's pretty much the perfect amount of foreshadowing for this reveal. There's enough hints that Sophis is the goddess for it to click the second Rhea casually drops the news, yet not so much it's instantly obvious. Not to mention, a twist being predictable doesn't make it bad. It makes it a logical choice for the narrative and rewards the people who figured it out, which is something I think more creatives need to understand. Chapter 9: The Cause of Sorrow. Ray reveals that Garrick Mach is going to host a ball soon, while Seteth informs Byleth and Geralt that they'll be guarding a chapel where some suspicious activity has been located this month. In the lead up to the ball, Byleth can select a student for the White Heron Cup, a dance contest, which gives said student access to the unique dancer class. Afterwards, your students will gather together, and with the end of their time at Garrick Mach looming over them, your main lord suggests meeting up again in 5 years' time during the Millennium Festival. There's then an animated cutscene of the ball, where Claude takes Byleth for a dance regardless of your route. Afterwards, Byleth leaves to get a moment's privacy and will run into a student of the player's choosing at the Goddess Tower, which is an activity typically associated with lovers. In the Blue Lion's route, however, Byleth will first run into Dimitri. He's also dodging the ball, and reveals that Edelgard was the one who taught him to dance. He says that Edelgard spent a year in the kingdom as a child with Lord Arundel, due to some turmoil in the Empire. While they didn't know each other's true identities back then, they met and became close friends. Dimitri reveals he gave her the parting gift of a dagger, something his other friends still tease him mercilessly about. He chose it because in Fargust, they are symbolically viewed as a way to cut a path to a better future, which totally doesn't describe Edelgard's ideology in any way, shape or form. Dimitri then grows a bit more morose, convinced she's probably forgotten all about him, which is somewhat true, and that there's no point trying to reconnect as they are simply too different now. which is both true and also not. After the Goddess Tower encounter, Byleth is roaming the monastery where they hear Rhea singing a song. Sophus recognizes it and realizes that she was the one who wrote it. She's clearly a bit distressed by this and basically hurries Byleth back to their bed. As the month comes to a close, Eloise fetches Byleth and Geralt, revealing that a bunch of demonic beasts have somehow appeared around the old chapel without breaching the walls. There was also a bunch of seemingly brainwashed students seen heading towards the chapel just beforehand, and I am totally sure that these two events are completely disconnected. After saving the remaining students from the demonic beasts, an animated cutscene plays. Geralt is assisting Monica when suddenly she stabs him in the back, lethally wounding him. A horrified Byleth instantly rewinds time to save him, but it doesn't matter, as the sword of the creator gets stopped by an eerie man who resembles Solon, known as Talus. Talus warps himself and Monica away, and a crying Byleth rushes to Geralt's side just in time to hear his last words as rain begins to pour. The day after, Byleth goes to Geralt's quarters. Sophus tries to console them, before prompting Byleth to find the thing Geralt said he'd hidden in his room in case something happened to him. It turns out to be his diary. Reading an entry, it's revealed that Rhea had just told him that his wife died giving birth to Byleth. Geralt thought there was something sus going on, however, as there's something really weird about his baby. They don't laugh or cry, and more pressingly, Byleth doesn't have a heartbeat. Rhea totally brushed off all his concerns, but is keeping an oddly close eye on them too. Deeply unnerved, Geralt reveals he pretended Byleth perished in a fire that broke out in the monastery before he fled into the night. After reading the entry, "If you're a blue lion," Dimitri comes to console Byleth, telling them to take the time they need to grieve. He does also remind Byleth, however, that their tears will dry up eventually and that they'll need to find a reason to keep moving forward. He tells Byleth about his experiences during the tragedy of Dusker, where he watched his father get decapitated, had his stepmother abandon him before disappearing into the flames, and couldn't save any of the loved ones he had there that evening. He's now taken it on as his duty to ensure that the victims can rest in peace. Dimitri then informs Byleth that the church has set up a massive task force dedicated purely to hunting down Monica and Talus. If you're in the other houses, it's Eloise who comes to give you his condolences instead, and informs Byleth Rhea is looking for them. Sophus tells Byleth to come back to the diary later, and also reveals she knows the source of their connection, but of course she doesn't explain what it is. Meeting with Rhea, more condolences occur, and she tells Byleth a bit about Geralt's past. Specifically, that he left the Knights due to falling in love with a nun, who he got pregnant. The childbirth went wrong, however, and she asked Rhea to save the baby instead of her. According to Rhea, Geralt couldn't accept that decision and fled. In other words, it's his diary from Rhea's perspective. Byleth then asks about their mother, and Rhea reveals that they had a connection of some sort before Eloise interrupts and tells Rhea he's got an urgent message for her. She then dismisses Byleth, telling them to get some rest. Starting off with the ball, if the Battle of the Eagle and Lion was the last chapter that was going to be purely fluff, this is the last plot event in White Clouds that aims to lighten the mood. It's the last rays of light before the sun begins to set. From a ludonarrative perspective, I also really like how the dancer class is obtained, and while we're on this topic, I'd also like to highlight that the generally plot irrelevant ball got a full animated cutscene. It's a cute one, don't get me wrong. but also an important part of the overall thesis of this video series, namely the fact that intelligent systems had to rush all of the post-timeskip routes, because no other silly scenes like this got animated cutscenes in them. Moving on to the Goddess Tower, most of these cutscenes are pretty good, but the real highlight is the Blue Lion's exclusive Dimitri scene. The brief flashback of him and young Edelgard is cute, but what I absolutely love about this scene is the effect their childhood friendship had on the both of them. A lot of Edelgard's actions are inspired by her belief that she has to cut a path towards a better future, aka the exact thing child Dimitri told her to do. And this is also the exact thing that leads to these two inevitably trying to kill each other. In some ways, Dimitri unwittingly created his own monster, and that's freaking neat. From a thematic perspective, I also really like Dimitri's refusal to reach out to Edelgard. Reaching out your hand is a huge motif in Azure Moon, and this is one of the moments that theme is threaded into White Clouds. Dimitri wants his friendship with Edelgard back, but he doesn't think it's going to work out, and therefore he doesn't even try to connect with her. But in a typical tragedy manner, unbeknownst to Dimitri, this was the last time he really had to ever reforge that connection. I don't have too much to say about the Rhea scene, other than the fact that it should be really clear to both Fire Emblem veterans and newcomers alike that Rhea's got a lot more connection to the goddess than merely being the archbishop of her church. Moving on to the main mission, any savvy player would instantly put together the whole demonic beasts and oddly acting students thing and go, oh no. This mission starts with a slowly mounting sense of foreboding, which eventually hits its climax, Geralt's death. Geralt dying is another twist that's not surprising. Parents in media full stop are pretty much prime killing off for character development fodder, and Fire Emblem is yet another franchise that follows that trend. Geralt, however, is a bit unusual by the series standards, as he sticks around for over a third of the game. The player actually gets the time to get genuinely attached to him, some possibly even lowering their guard when he gets past chapter 5 or so, with no demise in sight, which only makes his inevitable passing hurt even more. And yeah, it hurts! Intelligent Systems nailed every moment of this scene. The music tugs at the heartstrings, and Geralt, who was previously worried that his child didn't have emotions at all, gets one last moment of happiness when Byleth cries for the first time in their life over him. Ugh, that moment always gets me. I want to talk about the diary reveals and Rhea's scene simultaneously, so first I'm going to talk about Dimitri again. Boy howdy, this chapter really likes him. First of all, kudos to Dimitri, as next chapter is going to prove, he's the only lord who has any talent whatsoever at consoling people. Good job, Dimitri! You have basic manners! For now. Anyway, I also like what Dimitri's retelling of the tragedy of Duska does for the narrative. His father's decapitation is definitely going to affect his vocabulary in the future, that's for sure. And his stepmother ditching him is definitely the biggest hint we have to the tragedy's perpetrator so far. Unfortunately, while I've spent a lot of this video clowning on Verdant Wind, it's time for me to do the same for Azure Moon. This would have ultimately had a lot more impact if the mystery of the tragedy basically didn't get hand-waved. On to things though that actually do have a major effect on Azure Moon, this is the moment where Dimitri introduces his somewhat toxic desire to live for the dead. It's not a bad idea in theory, but oh boy, in practice this isn't going to turn out well for him. Finally though, let's go back to the Byleth reveals. It's very clear that there's something deeply off with our protagonist, and that Rhea probably has her fingerprints all over it. Whether Rhea's actions are malicious or not, however, is significantly more debatable. We get both Geralt's and Rhea's perspectives of the events leading up to Byleth's mother's death, and they are both very biased. Geralt, at the time of writing, clearly suspected that Rhea might have killed Citri, Byleth's mother, on purpose to do something to the baby Byleth, which was what inspired him to flee. At the same time though, remember, earlier in the story, he said in hindsight that he thought this might not have been necessary, and Rhea makes her perspective of the events very clear. Citri wanted Byleth to live over her, and Rhea obliged. There is no indication or motive for Rhea to lie about this. In fact, while the exact details get cut off, it's clear Citri wasn't just a random nun to her. At the same time, however, even if Rhea acted in accordance to Citri's wishes, her dismissiveness of Geralt's paranoia towards her definitely makes me arch a brow. Byleth didn't have a freaking heartbeat, and Rhea was, and still is, strangely interested in them. This moment is a brilliant example of one of the things I love about Three Houses' character writing. The characters are not reliable narrators. They are all coloured by their internal biases, and even if they don't outright lie, they do absolutely misdirect both purposefully and not. Neither Geralt or Rhea are depicting an entirely accurate series of events here, and I think that's neat. Chapter 10. Where the Goddess Dwells. Dimitri isn't the only lord who tries to console Byleth, though he definitely does the best job. In their respective routes, Edelgard essentially gives Byleth a tough love speech, with the emphasis on tough, while Claude also uses the opportunity to pester Byleth into lending him their recently deceased father's diary. Thanks guys, really appreciate it. Afterwards, it cuts to a meeting between Monica, who is apparently actually called Kronya, Tullus, and the Flame Emperor. Tullus states he only saved the former since there's something mysterious about their bodies, and he also calls the Flame Emperor his creation, a weapon made to burn even the gods. The Flame Emperor is clearly hacked off about this, and basically tells Tullus to piss off. In the Blue Line's route, however, this encounter goes differently, given Byleth was grieving for less time. Instead, they and Dimitri stumble across this villains convention. Dimitri wants to Zerg rush them, while Byleth wants to do a bit more snooping first. Their argument alerts the Flame Emperor to their presence, which ends with a dagger getting chucked at them and the bad guys warping away. Dimitri starts acting very weirdly when he sees her dagger, and takes it for himself. As the month comes to its end, your lord fetches Byleth. The knights have located Solon, and are about to launch an attack they've deliberately excluded Byleth from. Rhea tries to put her foot down and stop Byleth, Seteth very sensibly alluding to the fact that it's probably a trap, but your lord eventually sways him, pointing out Byleth is the best person for the job. As the battle begins, Kronya is there, waiting for them, and reveals her true form. She's a pale-skinned goth, just like Tullus and Solon. After Byleth kicks her ass, an animation plays, showing Kronya running away. She encounters Solon, saying she needs help, a sentiment he very much agrees with before ripping out her heart and using it to banish Byleth to the Shadow Realm. Sorry, Zaharas. Trapped in the void together, Sophus calls out Byleth for being a moron. She then has an epiphany. Sophus doesn't know how Rhea did it, but somehow she implanted Sophus inside Byleth, which is why they were such a weird kid. Sophus, aka the goddess, who has the power to break out of the Shadow Realm. But on the flip side, she has no body. So, Sophus decides to merge with Byleth's soul, granting them her powers and subsequently ceasing to exist in this ghost-like form. Byleth's hair is bleached a pale green as they go Perma Super Saiyan mode and destroy the Shadow Realm. Sorry, Zaharas. And soon after, they destroy Solon too. In the Black Eagles route, Edelgard asks what Byleth's going to do with their goddess powers now, bringing up a totally hypothetical situation about their students going to war with the world. Dimitri, meanwhile, compares Byleth to Ceres in his route, and Claude asks what the actual hell just happened in the Golden Year, and instantly ponders Rhea's motives for all of us. None of these scenes really matter though, as Byleth conks out almost instantly. As Byleth slowly returns to consciousness, they hear singing. Rhea is cradling their body as she sings Sophus's lullaby. Suffice to say, she is very excited by Byleth's fusion dance and tells Byleth she'll be watching over them, always and forever. This chapter is miserable, in a good way, mostly. Byleth does not have much personality as a silent protagonist in a series that doesn't normally use them. But this time, they are the one that instigates the plot events this chapter. While their lord aids and abets them, Byleth is the one to ignore Rhea's warnings and enter a blatant trap in search of revenge. Their irrational behaviour here really does just hammer home the effect of Gerald's death, combined with the fact that the chipper monastery theme gets replaced this chapter by a far more melancholy tune. Really, the audio choices were fantastic here. Finally, when Byleth does get their revenge, it's deeply unrewarding. Cronya's death at the hands of her ally is brutal. There's no satisfaction to be found as she begs Byleth to save her life. Her being a terrible person doesn't mitigate the horror of what's happening, which I do appreciate, since the way the Agarthans are depicted as being purely evil in a game that otherwise does grey morality very well has always been one of Three Houses' biggest flaws in my opinion. But then of course, there's the kicker. Specifically, what happened to Sophus. It's normal for the main character in a Fire Emblem game to get a mid to late game power up, normally in the form of a class promotion or a new weapon. This moment is almost always portrayed as a triumph, as the main character gaining some insight about themselves or the world they live in. Of course, in Three Houses, while seeing Byleth tear their way out of Zaharas is pretty satisfying, the most predominant thing I felt during this moment was sadness. Because for all intents and purposes, unless you S-rank the physical child for some reason, Sophus might as well have died here. Well, double died. She makes no return in the story beyond a brief scene just after the time skip. I think this is the moment it truly dawned on me that Three Houses was a tragedy, and that this game was not going to have a happy end. Sophus, in many ways, is Byleth's first friend, their constant companion, and now she's gone. While this moment hits hard and has a lot of fun story ramifications, unfortunately, it leads to some pretty big issues post-time skip. Because Sophus's role, like the buddy characters in a Persona game or a travel companion in a Zelda title, is to serve as the silent protagonist Byleth's voice. Her role is to give Byleth a bit of personality. She's the one who gets them, and by proxy, the player, to question the world around them. Sophus is half of Byleth's character. And don't get me wrong, I like Byleth. I think they are very interesting by silent protagonist standards, especially considering the implications they were barely sentient until Sophus woke up, and the player, aka Byleth, started the game. The problem is that Byleth as is doesn't work as a character without Sophus. If their fusion was truly a fusion, and Byleth actually started having internal monologue, and not just implied, but stated feelings on things, intelligent systems could have gotten away with this. But Byleth doesn't become a full character at this point, and instead, without Sophus, just becomes a camera for the player. This doesn't have too much of an effect on the rest of White Clouds though, and in fact kinda works because something is clearly missing, and at least for a short while, it feels intentional. In fact, as I mentioned before, Sophus's borderline death was what really solidified Three Houses' tone for me in my first playthrough. Unfortunately though, like I said, while this isn't a huge problem in White Clouds, later on, especially in Silver Snow, this is going to cause big issues. Chapter 11, Throne of Knowledge. The chapter starts with Sedith confronting Rhea about Byleth, where he asks what the hell she did to them. Rhea, unusually snappily, refuses to answer, and reveals she is going to take Byleth to the Holy Tomb, where their dearest wishes should come to fruition. Byleth then enters, and Rhea tells them about this month's mission. They'll be visiting the Holy Tomb so they can get a revelation from the goddess. The goddess who basically died last month. Yeah. If you explore the monastery at the beginning of the month and have Edelgard's C+ support, she will ask Byleth to go to Enbar with her. If Byleth agrees, they end up visiting Edelgard's father together. To be blunt, he already looks like he has one foot in the grave. While Edelgard is very apologetic about it, she asks him to abdicate the throne to her, which he agrees to do. Edelgard then gets coronated, and the former emperor apologizes for not being able to save her from the prime minister. Edelgard forgives him, however, who she doesn't forgive is Duke Aya. She fires him, putting him under house arrest. After all that's done, she gives Byleth a preemptive farewell. After the revelation in the Holy Tomb, she'll need to return to Enbar, ending her time at Garreg Mach. The end of the month then arrives, and you and your students and Rhea head to the Holy Tomb. Dimitri muses about Rhea's clear combat prowess for a little bit, but is ultimately kinda distracted. Claude and his route, meanwhile, wonders why they are even doing this, given the goddess has already given Byleth her power. Meanwhile, the Black Eagles skip straight to the next scene. As Rhea leads you to the tomb, surprise! It's Sophus's throne. Byleth sits in it, but absolutely nothing happens, which confuses the heck out of Rhea, as she was clearly expecting that things would go down differently here. At this point, the routes diverge heavily, so I'm going to go through them one at a time. Let's start with the Black Eagles. Edelgard tells everyone to stop what they are doing, and then a swarm of Imperial soldiers fill the tomb with the intention of looting it. The Eagles question what's going on, and Edelgard reveals that she's the Flame Emperor, with Hubert being her trusty accomplice. Rhea loses her shit and tells Byleth to destroy them both. Edelgard apologizes to Byleth and the Eagles, but refuses to back down and tells her army to take the Creststones. You then have to protect the tomb and take down Edelgard. Upon doing so, Rhea tells you to execute her immediately. At this point, assuming the player has met the Crimson Flower requirements, the player is given a choice: kill Edelgard or spare her. If the player chooses to kill, Edelgard and Hubert flee, teleporting away as Rhea directs a hellfire and brimstone "You will suffer for all eternity" speech at her. Charming, Rhea! At this point, the route reunites with the others. If you protect Edelgard, however, that's where things get interesting. Edelgard is shocked, but grateful, and Rhea is predictably furious. She calls Byleth another one in a long line of failures and promises to rip their heart out of their chest. Charming, Rhea! Before we get a CG of her turning into a dragon. Hubert then warps you all out of there, and the chapter ends. Meanwhile, in the other route, they get ambushed by the Imperial Army and the masked Flame Emperor. In the Blue Lions, Dimitri realizes they are connected with Adrestia somehow, and asks the Flame Emperor what the hell they are doing. They then reveal they are here to take the Crest Stones, and Dimitri scoffs, accusing them of doing anything for power, like the tragedy of Dusker showed. The Flame Emperor says, "Bro, you are barking up the wrong tree here," before telling the army to steal, steal, steal. After defeating the Flame Emperor, there's an animated cutscene of Dimitri knocking off their mask. He then starts laughing. And not in a good way. Because the Flame Emperor is none other than his stepsister, Edelgard. Dimitri goes full rampage mode, and while Byleth tries to hold him back, it doesn't work. When Edelgard's soldiers try to protect her, Dimitri grabs one of them, crushing his skull with his bare hands before smiling maniacally. Afterwards, he tells Edelgard he wants her to answer something before he kills her. Namely, why did she cause the tragedy of Dusker? Edelgard gets pretty pissed off by that and says, "Bro, how many times do I need to tell you it wasn't me?" Dimitri, of course, thinks she is a lying liar who lies, which is normally true, though not in this case. And Edelgard then flees as Rhea also has a Joker moment. In the Golden Deer, Claude realizes the Flame Emperor is there for some tomb robbing immediately. The Flame Emperor agrees, calling the Crest Stones infernal power that masquerades as medicine, but is really a poison, implying that she's planning on destroying them. After defeating her, Claude is a bit shocked to see the Flame Emperor is Edelgard, but that's about it. She flees, Rhea goes full conservative Christian preacher, and Claude realizes that Edelgard clearly knows something he doesn't, though he's got no choice but to try and pry that information out of Rhea once she's cooled down a bit. Afterwards, the Golden Deer, Blue Lions, and Silver Snow routes begin to reunite, but not quite yet. Seteth gives the Empire kids the opportunity to go home, given Adrestia is all but certainly going to declare war on the church. They don't, because it'd be a nightmare gameplay-wise if Byleth lost 90% of their army. In the Blue Lions route, Felix is like, "Told you so!" While the rest of your students wonder why the heck Dimitri snapped like that. The routes then show a CG of Edelgard giving a speech. She states that the church divided Fodlan, benefiting from the country's conflict, all while preying on the emotional and financial support of those who just wanted the goddess's protection. Cutting back to the church, a worried Seteth tells Byleth about the declaration of war on the church and their allies. Seteth's information isn't quite accurate, however. Specifically, he acts like Edelgard all but forced her way onto the throne, instead of asking politely, which is what happened in reality. Either way though, the pertinent thing is correct. A war is coming. Man, writing this recap just reinforced how much this game lets down Claude. Rhea, Seteth, Edelgard and Dimitri all get these big emotional beats, while he's just kinda here. Actually, it's worse than that. All of Claude's behaviour up to this point definitely aligns him a lot more with Edelgard than the church. Not that I think he'd ever just willingly go along with her either, mind you. But alas, instead of chasing after Edelgard, he gets stuck with the church since intelligence systems didn't have the budget nor time to give him a proper route. But yeah, this is the chapter that sets up the second half of the game, the war between the three nations, and also the chapter where everyone except Claude has gone full mask off. I am going to talk about Rhea first, as most of her behaviour is the same throughout the route. Rhea has been pretty sus up to this point, with her hidden gender in regards to Byleth, her use of violence to maintain the church's power, and now there's the fact that even Seteth, her right-hand man, is convinced she has crossed some sort of line. At the same time though, Rhea has also been consistently nice up until this point. She acts calm, level-headed and friendly, occasionally showing hints of steel, but more frequently acting forlorn when she's being wronged. This chapter though, we get to see beneath the Archbishop's mask, and, well, to be blunt, her violent rhetoric in this chapter puts post-time skip Dimitri to shame. Her language has major hardcore anti-gay preacher vibes, so kudos on Intelligent Systems and Koei Tecmo for really nailing her religious fundamentalism. Also, there's a way that in the Crimson Flower route, she drops all affection for Byleth the instant they stand against her. There's no tearful, "Why are you doing this?" There's no imploring Byleth to make another choice. It's an instant, "You're dead to me." This chapter, after multiple chapters of Geralt softening up to her and admitting Rhea probably isn't some ultimate evil, reminds the audience that no, for all her grace, there was a reason Geralt grew scared of her. There's something violent and unhinged lying beneath Rhea's surface. While I wouldn't call the kindly Archbishop act a lie, it's clearly only half of her personality, which definitely sets something up for the post-time skip routes. Not that many of them capitalize on that, mind you. Looking back at this scene when you're in the know, however, and it's also clear that, like Dimitri again, a lot of Rhea's violence this chapter stems from her trauma. Given her fondness for the Adrestian royal family, being descendants of a dear friend of hers, Edelgard's betrayal feels personal, even if they have no actual relationship. Plus, considering she's aligned with the people who murdered Rhea's mother, and is also invading said mother's resting space, it's understandable that Rhea loses her shit, even if, yeah, she absolutely needs to calm down. Oh, and I guess that this is where it's revealed she's a big dragon in the Crimson Flower route, but I want to circle back to that moment after I talk about the Blue Lions route. This is the chapter where Dimitri's already fragile mental health shatters. He has convinced himself so deeply that the Flame Emperor is his personal nemesis, the one responsible for all of his and his loved ones' agony, that his mind cannot cope with the reveal that she's his once beloved stepsister. His rage is so great and all-consuming, it completely overwhelms his sense of honour and compassion. He embraces the part of himself he once deemed unacceptable, abandoning the virtues that he once tried to maintain. After this chapter, he's brusque and hostile. He doesn't give a damn about the war and what it may do to his country. He just wants Edelgard to suffer. There's a reason the animated cutscene in the Blue Lions route is one of the most iconic ones in the game. Because while Dimitri having a violent streak is nothing new, the game has been foreshadowing the fact that he's going to snap for a while now. He doesn't just teeter over the edge, he jumps off it. Hard. Him killing that Imperial soldier with a smile on his face? It's chilling. It's also the first step in Dimitri beginning to come like the perpetrators of his own pain. By engaging in remorseless murder, he's taking a step towards being like the Agarthans who callously slaughtered his own family for their own ends. It's a really compelling setup to Dimitri's character post-time skip. It's clear that he's going to get a lot worse before he gets better. Now though, let's move on to Edelgard. Who on earth could have seen this moment coming? Let's start with the coronation. The scene between her and her father, her last living relative, is pretty powerful. Plus, her dispensing Duke Aya some justice is very satisfying. I do have a problem with this scene though, and that's it's so easy to miss. You have to explore the monastery on a specific day, and because of this, so many people I know who wanted to play Crimson Flower got railroaded straight to Silver Snow instead, which is terrible because Silver Snow is terrible, but more on that in a later video. Back to the Holy Tomb. It's clear that Edelgard doesn't want to hurt Byleth and her fellow Eagles, but she will do it if they get in her way, which summarizes a lot of Edelgard's actions, really. Unlike Dimitri, she takes no pleasure in hurting other people. Unlike Claude, however, if she judges it a necessary evil, boy howdy, she'll do it. And unlike Dimitri, she's also very aware that many people would view her as a villain for this. Hence why she's so goddamn surprised that Byleth would even think of choosing her side. On that note, I love this moment for Byleth's character if they do choose to do that. Whether you ship it or not, Byleth has some really fun parallels with Edelgard. Both have the crests of flames. Byleth due to Rhea's machinations, while Edelgard gets it due to the actions of Rhea's sworn enemy. Edelgard has been scientifically engineered to destroy the church, while Byleth is the latest attempt to restore its goddess. And in this moment, Byleth abandons the destiny Rhea molded them from birth for, in order to save the weapon of the Archbishop's greatest enemy. A slap in the face for Rhea, yes, but just, it's such a good moment thematically speaking. Even in the Silver Snow route, while nowhere near as emotional. Personally speaking, Edelgard's betrayal is definitely a slap in the face, especially following the double whammy of Byleth's father's and their best friend's death. Now that I've finished talking about Edelgard and Dimitri, let's circle back to Rhea's Dragony reveal. This moment is so huge in Crimson Flower, because this is the moment where that route's main antagonist shows her true colours, by, in this instance, revealing she's literally a monster. Not that I think Rhea is a monster, it's just the symbolism used here. And yet, in sharp contrast to the Blue Lion's animated cutscene, this is just a simple CG. This is a problem that will be prevalent on all the routes post-time skip, but Crimson Flower suffers the most in this regard, as the developers explicitly confirmed that it was the last route designed. While this will become a lot more prevalent post-time skip, this is the first chronological piece of evidence hinting at just how rushed those routes were. Still, CG or not, I think the character beats for everyone who isn't Claude are really damn great this chapter. Anyway, away from characters and back to the plot, this is the moment where everything changes. Innocence is lost, a war is on the horizon, and school time is over. It's all downhill from here, baby. And on that note, let's talk about Chapter 12, Crimson Flower Route, Outset of a Power Struggle. The Black Eagles, sans Flame, who ditched you, arrive at an Imperial army camp, joining Edelgard's forces with some reluctance, and she gives you the pitch. Rhea is an inhuman entity that uses her powers to cover up the falsehoods the church peddles to control the people of Fodlan, annihilating anyone that dares defy her. Which, well, while Edelgard's read on Rhea's situation isn't what I would call at all unbiased, she is pretty right about the annihilation thing, as the rest of White Clouds has hammered that into our heads. Afterwards, Edelgard chats with Byleth a bit. Despite the grandiose speeches, she's getting a bit of good old-fashioned anxiety, given she's starting a war where a lot of people are going to inevitably die. Still, Edelgard doesn't falter. She thinks making sacrifices in the present is the only way to ensure a future where people, including people like her, don't have to suffer due to the Church's agenda. Edelgard plans to reveal to the world the Church's evils, along with those of the nobles it enables. Finally, she decides to dub the player's army the Black Eagle Strike Force, which is treated as an extremely dorky thing to do, because it is. Cutscenes ending for the moment, the player gets the option to explore a non-monastery location for the first time ever. It's basically a square room, but hey, it's definitely more convenient to navigate. Some of the students you can talk to are pretty conflicted, but most of them do realise that at bare minimum, the Church is pretty sus. Eventually marching to Garrukmach, the strike force invades the monastery they once guarded barely a month ago, with your old enemy, the Death Knight, joining your side. Rhea leads the defence, having calmed down a lot since last chapter. Well, unless you get Byleth or Edelgard to attack her, that is. Upon losing, Rhea grits her teeth, saying she won't allow the monastery, or more oddly, her mother, to fall. A CG then appears as she goes full dragon mode, towering over Byleth and shooting a laser beam at them. As the castle crumbles around them, Byleth is caught up in the collapse, falling as Edelgard screams, and the scene cuts to black. The narrator reveals that Edelgard managed to capture Garrukmach at a great cost, while Rhea and the knights retreated to Ferdiad. Byleth's status is unknown. Well, this chapter recap was refreshingly short, and truthfully, I don't have too much to say about it. Most of Edelgard's character moments are pretty good. She definitely tries to make sure everyone knows what they are signing up for, and I do like the reveal that even she has doubts about her plans. Doubts she totally ignores, but details schmeetails. The whole Black Eagle Strike Force thing is cute too, and pretty funny when juxtaposed to the whole I'm starting a war thing. Man, Edelgard really is at her most 18-year-old girl at this moment. I do have a couple of issues with this chapter, however. Firstly, there's Edelgard's anti-dragon racism, which makes sense, considering her experiences with non-humans involves them brutally torturing her family to death and running a hugely controlling church. At the same time, it's definitely a character flaw, and one I think the story needed to challenge her on at some point, but, well, that's a next video thing. My other problem is that Edelgard does kind of a bad job at explaining her goals here. So, Edelgard hates the crest-based nobility system, something the Church benefits from perpetuating, and therefore wants to destroy both of them in order to introduce a meritocracy, while getting humanity out from under the thumb of a dragon woman with mummy issues. Unfortunately, a lot of this explanation is stuck in the supports. It would have been a lot stronger if Edelgard's explanation for her actions was less, the Church sucks and Rhea is a dragon, and more, the crest sucks and the Church enables them via giant dragon. Anyway, I digress. Who knows, maybe there's some localization shenanigans going on here? Because there definitely is later down the line in Crimson Flower. While I'm on the topic of flaws, the end of this chapter, yet again, is a perfect example of CGs in late-stage Three Houses being used in moments where full-on cutscenes would have been much better. The other routes have the advantage of benefiting from White Cloud's over-allocation of the animation budget, but alas, what is essentially Crimson Flower Chapter 1 does not. Back to positive things though, there's two things this chapter does. Firstly, it introduces a new explore area, and one that's much quicker to get through than the monastery too. While we never return to this location, it's a fun, fresh little thing. On the topic of freshness, this is the first map that truly diverges away from the other routes gameplay-wise, and the only example of that in White Clouds. Instead of defending the monastery, you're invading it, and like many of the maps that are going to appear when I write about Crimson Flower proper, is a lovely change of pace compared to the other routes. Either way, while this chapter definitely has some problems, it's not a completely dissatisfying end to Crimson Flower's version of White Clouds. It sets up everything it needs to for the post-time skip route, and that's the important thing here. Chapter 12, All the Other Routes, to War. Having received Edelgard's declaration of war, Rhea is pissed. Zedith, meanwhile, is convinced that Edelgard is a one-dimensional villain who wants to conquer the country for the sake of it, and maybe even make herself a false god queen. Something anyone who has paid any attention to Edelgard will instantly realise is bloody stupid. Rhea then anoints Byleth as her successor if she is indisposed in the coming fight. After Byleth leaves, Zedith begs Rhea to just tell him what the hell is going on. Rhea reveals that Byleth is the vessel of the goddess, and that she believes that one day, Sophis will take over their psyche, returning to the world. So, about that, Rhea. Anyway, the Imperial army eventually arrives. In the Blue Lion's route, while Dimitri is still being relatively polite to his classmates, he's also giddy with delight at the thought of brutally murdering Edelgard. Which, yeah. Claude, meanwhile, is still ruminating on the failed ritual, along with the truth behind the crest stones and weapons. He does give Byleth a rather nice friendship speech, however, saying he'll always be on their side. The player is then tasked with taking down Edelgard while defending Garreg Mach. By the time you beat her in a fight, however, the battle is already lost. An animated cutscene occurs where Rhea, as forewarned, passes leadership of the church over to Byleth. She states she refuses to let another Red Canyon happen here, and turns into her dragon form, entering the fray. Meanwhile, Dimitri is absorbed in the fight, while Claude is slightly more cognizant of how the situation has changed. Rhea is then attacked by a horde of demonic beasts, however, knocking down some walls to reveal a dark canyon. Byleth rushes back in to save her, to Rhea's dismay, as Tullus appears, knocking them into the abyss with dark magic. And so, White Clouds ends, with the Emperor taking over Garreg Mach as per Crimson Flower. This time though, Rhea has vanished, location unknown. Just like last time though, Byleth's fate is an equal mystery. This chapter was also a lot shorter than I was expecting as well. Just like Crimson Flower's version of chapter 12, it isn't the most emotionally impactful chapter either. Truthfully, White Cloud's real climax is chapter 11. This chapter mainly serves as the bridge to the post-time skip route, and is a good way to get Byleth out of the picture so the main lords can grow without them. For better or worse. At long last though, we get confirmation of Rhea's plans. She wants Byleth to be used as a vessel to resurrect Sophis. Unbeknownst to Rhea, however, her plans have already failed. Byleth is just Byleth. Sophis didn't possess them, and instead chose to grant them full access to her power. While there's still plenty of things we haven't learned about Rhea yet, this is a hugely critical piece of the puzzle. She favours Byleth so greatly because she thinks they're the goddess herself. While I do have some gripes with Rhea passing the role of Archbishop over to Byleth, namely the fact that I don't genuinely think Byleth has the knowledge needed to run a church dedicated to a religion they only heard about less than a year ago, it is a decision that's in character for Rhea. I do goddamn wish Byleth was allowed to have some actual opinions about this though. Ending this chapter on a more positive note, however, we get an animated cutscene. Yay! Don't get used to it. Unlike in Crimson Flower, this was a great way of introducing Rhea's Immaculate One form. In fact, this was a pretty good Rhea scene in general. She passes the reins on to Byleth, becoming the Serene Archbishop one last time before attempting to sacrifice herself against the Empire's hordes. Still, her actions are for naught. Talos attacks her greatest hope, leaving her unable to do anything but scream as Byleth presumably plunges to their death. One final tragedy as the White Clouds reaches its end. So, I hope I've shown you all why I think White Cloud's writing is generally very good. I know there were a few moments I panned, but the primary reason I feel that way about a lot of those scenes isn't because they are poorly written, it's because they are interesting, and the post-time skip routes simply drop the ball. Don't get me wrong, White Clouds isn't perfect. For one, the Lords don't really have much of a relationship aside from Dimitri's unrequited attachment to Edelgard, which I think is a pretty big bummer, but White Clouds does the important things well. The mystery of Fodlan is slowly built up, the charming facade of the world slowly peeled away as we see more of the rot beneath its surface. Finally, blow after blow keeps on coming, each fledgling moment of hope snatched from our fingertips, until the continent is plunged into an inevitable war, and your player character goes missing. The pacing is immaculate, the plot elements are great, the mystery is compelling, the characterization is masterful. I think White Clouds as a whole is the strongest Fire Emblem's writing has ever been. But if you look up White Clouds or hear anyone talk to you about it, you are mainly going to hear complaints. Why? First of all, a lot of the hardcore gamer crowd hate the monastery. I think all of those complaints are stupid, as for 70% of the game, it is completely optional. You don't ever have to go there outside a couple of mandatory missions you can skim through and the tutorials. Those tutorials, however, are indicative of what I think the real problem with White Clouds is. Because the tutorials are fine when you do them once. When you do them 4 times, however, yeah. The true problem with White Clouds is that you need to repeat it far too many times. While the various routes might seem pretty divergent in this recap, that's because this is a recap where I am deliberately highlighting all of those scenes. When you actually play through the game, that's not quite the case. Most of the unique conversations you get between Byleth and their class are just mindless fluff. The monastery dialogue is 90% the same between the routes. To me though, the real killer though are the maps. Three Houses' hyper-flexible classing system makes it so that you can essentially turn any unit into anything. This has the side effect of making each house ultimately feel the exact same gameplay-wise. While Dimitri, Edelgard and Claude get differentiated from each other post-time skip, each getting a unique class and weapon, even they get lost amidst the sandbox that is Three Houses' character class system. Three Houses is not a short game in general, and for all of the strengths of its story writing, White Clouds is not at all designed for replayability. In fact, the devs actively didn't care about that, assuming that most fans would play one route and drop it, which, well, the Persona 3 social link dating conundrum really should have shown devs by now that the largest voices in a fanbase are going to squeeze as much content out of a game as possible. Ultimately, I think this is one of the first major signs that the developers probably shouldn't have made a game with 4 routes. Even I, the largest White Cloud stan in existence, really had enough of it by the time I was getting around to my 3rd playthrough of the game, and I couldn't bring myself to play Silver Snow until a good year after all of the other routes. I could wax lyrical on what I'd do to fix White Clouds for ages, changing some maps, altering the class system, adding a branch of fate option that allows someone to start a new file at the time skip, you name it. At the same time though, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to show that Three Houses' writing team can really cook, assuming they get enough time with the oven. And, on that note, to show that no, they absolutely did not get enough time with said oven. In fact, to a degree, White Cloud's poor replayability may in part be caused by this. Even if intelligent systems wanted to make each class's version of White Clouds more unique, judging by the post-timeskip routes, they probably wouldn't have had the budget to do that. But, well, that's more of a thing for the next video or videos. I don't know exactly when they're gonna come out. A credible League of Fortunes Weave's release date just dropped literally on the day I wrote this, and I can't see myself analysing another 40 chapters of Fire Emblem before it drops, if those rumours are correct. And on the topic of Fortune's Weave, I'm almost certainly going to want to make a video on that while it's fresh, considering I also have a full-time job, social life, and other hobbies. The follow-ups for this video are probably going to be months away, at minimum. Still, if you are interested in seeing part 2, please like this video and subscribe. I'm pretty new at this whole YouTube thing, so any support really helps. I mainly make videos about various JRPGs, with Fire Emblem, Persona, and Pokemon being my favourite franchises. With that shameless plug over, I'll bid you all farewell. Until next time!